As we gently tiptoe into the slightly murky, delightfully soporific waters of Nestlé's history, imagine yourself curling up with a warm mug of cocoa. Consider it a liquid hug from a multinational corporation whose legacy is not quite as sweet as its confections. Our journey tonight winds back to the mid-19th century, where our tale begins in a Swiss town that moves at the pace of a cow's leisurely munch on a meadow's worth of grass. Here, a gentleman named Henri Nestlé was putting together something more thrilling than a plot twist in a Victorian novel, infant cereal. Henri, a German pharmacist by trade, had a simple, noble quest to reduce infant mortality with his groundbreaking formula. The secret ingredient? Wheat flour, milk, and sugar. A trio that sounds more like a cookie recipe than a nutritional breakthrough. Yet, in those days, when porridge was practically the only thing on the menu, Henri's concoction was like a beacon of modernity. His experimentation and the delightful absence of lumps delighted mothers and infants alike, and thus, farine lactée was born. But before you drift into dreams of babies napping with bellies full of sweet porridge, there was a curious competitor in the background. Enter Daniel Peter, a young man whose dreams were made less of wheat and more of chocolate. As he tinkered in his chocolate factory, he inadvertently concocted the world's first milk chocolate with a little help, quite literally, a splash, of Nestlé's condensed milk. It was a delectable chapter in culinary history that almost everyone remembers fondly, right before they realize the guilt of eating one too many chocolate bars. As the years flowed as smoothly as a Swiss river, Henri's enterprise grew. He eventually joined forces with George Page and Charles Page, two American brothers who weren't just satisfied with treating dairy cows like bovine royalty. Together, they helped weave the indestructible web of what would eventually stand as one of the world's largest food companies. Nestlé's recipe for success involved not just milk and cookies, but also a dash of cunning expansion that could fill entire pantries and stimulate serene visions of global dominance. Now, my sleepy historian, before you drift off entirely, conjure an image of the bustling streets of Vevey, Switzerland, where this empire found its roots. Picture cobblestones slick with rain, the smell of fresh milk wafting through the air, and Hans, the delivery horse, clopping merrily along, blissfully unaware that he will soon be replaced by shiny trucks and faster things with names like efficiency and modernization. These quaint beginnings feel as quaint and comforting as a worn-out quilt until we unravel more of Nestlé's complex history in the chapters ahead. For now, let the soft rustle of Swiss winds guide your dreams, while the gentle clinking of glass milk bottles lulls you towards slumber. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. In our next sequence of sleepy insights, we will continue down this historical rabbit hole, tracing more of Henri Nestlé's fascinating world and those little-known corners of history that rarely surface in your morning coffee chat. Cozy down and let the promise of sweet stories, yet to unravel, tuck you into a most pleasant repose. As the shadows of history stretch gently over the horizon, we find ourselves tiptoeing into the delicate beginnings of Nestlé, a company that, much like a mischievous child, has had its fair share of curious antics. Picture the cobblestone lanes of 1860s Switzerland, a land known for its picturesque mountains, punctual trains, and cows contentedly chewing their cud while contemplating life's grand questions. It is here we meet Henri Nestlé, a fascinating character whose ambitions would eventually lead to the creation of one of the world's largest food conglomerates. Henri, it must be said, wasn't always the polished name on supermarket shelves. Born Heinrich Nestlé, he had the foresight one day to drop that surplus I from his first name while keeping that enticing E at the end of his last name, possibly believing that one less I would eliminate a bit of confusion, much like the slimming sensation one gets from removing a single sock. This simple act of lexical rebranding would lay the foundation for a legacy sprinkled with both sweet and saltier tales. Before Nestlé was a household name whispered through kitchens across the globe, Henri was a wildly inquisitive pharmacist. Imagine him, if you will, tinkering away in his modest little lab, much like an alchemist with a modern penchant for puff pastries instead of gold. It was in this modest setting that Henri concocted farine lactée, an innovative concoction designed to combat the alarming infant mortality rate, driven by his compassionate heart, and maybe just a smidgen by the hope of turning a tidy profit. This mixture was a blend of cow's milk, wheat flour, and sugar, almost like breakfast cereal, but infinitely more forgiving on the teeth. Henri's creation found its way into the tiny hands, or mouths, of babies far and wide, much to the relief of mothers everywhere. And so, from this nurturing start, the seeds of an empire were sown in the fertile soil of necessity, mixed with a dash of almond-scented ambition. But this was just the overture to an opus filled with symphonic highs and dramatic lows, a culinary ballet that would twirl its way into the corners of every pantry. As Nestlé began to unfurl its wings in the 19th century market, it did so with the grace of a swan, albeit occasionally tripping over its own webbed feet. The formula was patented and word spread like Swiss chocolate melting on a warm day. Business blossomed, and as the bell sounded the end of the Industrial Revolution's first act, Nestlé's recipes began making their dramatic entrance onto the world's grand stage. In those early days, our story might have been that of a quaint family undertaking had Nestlé not taken an important pivot towards diversification, a term which, at the time, probably sounded as foreign to Henri as the concept of email then. Yet, diversify he did, and soon the Nestlé brand branched out from its cozy origins into the expansive and, dare we say, slightly unpredictable waters of the global market. Henri Nestlé retired in 1875, presumably to perfect his Swiss yodeling or partake in leisurely walks through quaint alpine meadows. His departure from the company didn't slow its momentum. Rather, it was like preparing a catapult and then giving it a gentle nudge. The baton was passed to more ambitious hands, and the global symphony of Nestlé's conductors began to play louder, each composition more complex than the last. And so, in this orchestra of dairy, grains, and innovation, the stage was set for Nestlé's venture beyond the borders of Switzerland and into the hearts, minds, and perhaps occasionally questionable contexts of history. It's okay if your eyelids now droop slightly, for storytelling, much like any Swiss journey, offers beckoning whispers of relaxation along with its tales of daring do's. As we slide elegantly towards the next chapter, let your thoughts linger on those scenic Swiss glows, knowing that this journey is only just beginning. Nestlé's tapestry, much like a fine milk chocolate, invites you to relish every piece. See you on the other side of slumber, where the adventure sweetens just as a morning cup of cocoa. As daylight flickers to twilight, let us journey over a century into the past and slip into the world around 1920, where the whispers of smokestacks and the hum of burgeoning industry dominate. There, amidst the lulling sounds of progress and the quiet rustle of papers in dusty boardrooms, we find a certain company named Nestlé, preparing to launch a revolution, not with foot soldiers or cannons, but with creamy chocolate bars and delightful tins of cocoa, all heralded as the future of taste. Ah, the unmistakable scent of chocolate. Just the thought could make even the sternest historian crack a smile. The early 20th century whispered of sweetness, and Nestlé might have slyly added, with just a hint of bitter history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Imagine the cobblestones of Vevey, Switzerland, gently rocked by footsteps emerging from clattering automobiles. A town mostly serene, yet with eagerness in the air, like the town crier was about to shout a secret, if only there were still town criers left to do so. In those days, Nestlé was not just peddling any chocolate. Their offerings were rich, creamy, tempered just so, and honestly irresistible. But behind the rich flavors and glossy packaging lay an intrigue of corporate maneuverings, not unlike a chocolate souffle that deflates upon the gentlest touch. Yes, dear bedtime traveler, there were stories to tell, beyond the delight of the taste buds. Picture, if you will, a boardroom with windows overlooking the serene Swiss landscape, where the grand dreamers of Nestlé, ties slightly askew, plotted to sweeten the world. But as with any recipe, perfections came from trials, and Nestlé had its share. There was the great tin can incident, a time when the company decided that condensed milk could save the world, or at least hold sway over a few more households. Never mind the details, such as expiration dates being treated as, well, mere suggestions. It was a delightful time of discovery. Butterfat percentages and all. And yet, high in the hillsides surrounding Lake Geneva, a different tale brewed. One that involved more than just milk and cocoa beans. The tale included farmers, smallholders, treasured like alpine goats, hooked neatly into agreements that flavored Nestlé's products with the essence of 1,000 gentle protests. Backroom deals as artful as Swiss watchmaking. Now, while sitting cozily in your armchair tonight, that might be a scandal you never imagined while sifting through your pantry for a nighttime chocolate treat. Nestlé's expansion was a veritable dance, choreographed with the deft steps of mergers and acquisitions. In corners of the globe previously unimagined by chocolate lovers, Nestlé reached, much like a slender tendril of vine extending toward the sun. If it happens that their march sometimes stumbled, perhaps due to a label misplaced here, or a promise somewhat bent there, it was all part of their great confectionery comedy. But here's a charming twist. The townsfolk grew fond of the workers at the factories. Despite debates over wages or the occasional hiccup in the chocolate supply chain, there bloomed a mutual admiration. After all, didn't everyone love a man or woman who brought singed chocolate home? Over time, Nestlé grew not only in size and reach, but in their mastery over the delicate alchemy of blending chocolate with public relations. When the rivers of milk started flowing from content cows to large-scale processing plants, one could hear the faint notes of triumph, with factory managers who perhaps, from time to time, might have whistled a little tune, sourced directly from a chocolate ad. As dusk falls deeper, the serene hum of Vive at Rest conjures the melodic air of an age where chocolate dreams billowed like the gentle Swiss mist over mountaintops. So, as we pause with a sip of imagination, let us drift into the night, where the whispers of past cocoa adventures beckon us softly toward the next chapter of our tale. Once upon a time in the quiet, rolling hills of Switzerland, long before the arrival of Toblerone and overly punctual trains, there was a man named Henri Nestlé. Picture him with a confident twinkle in his eye, armed with a desire to turn ordinary things into exceptionally edible ones. Now, if you find yourself wondering how Henri fits into your cozy bedtime narrative, well, my gentle sleeper, settle in as I weave you a tale as smooth as a cup of hot cocoa. Henry, much like any ambitious 19th century gent with an impeccably waxed moustache, was a man of his time, a time obsessed with milk, flour, and entrepreneurial spirit. He had spent years experimenting with various concoctions, much to the bemusement of his neighbors. Legend has it, cats would gather outside his modest laboratory, lured in by a waft of curiosity and an ever so slight hope of tasting Henri's milk-based experiments. One fateful day, as the story lovingly goes, Henri concocted a formula that would change everything. Imagine the dramatic flash of sunlight pouring through pastel curtains, a moment of pure eureka. Henri had developed a milk-based infant formula that was quite radically both nourishing and non-lethal for babies who couldn't be breastfed. A revolution wrapped in a simple scoop of powdery dreams. With this creation, our dear Henri believed he had tapped into the latte art level pinnacle of nutritional science. He confidently named his wonder farine lactée, which, if murmured correctly, is an excellent sedative to wandering minds. This transformation of milk into powdered form was no ordinary feat. It was akin to transforming ordinary bread into a Parisian croissant. As charming as this innovation was, it must be mentioned with the utmost gentle whisper that Nestlé's newfound product was not greeted with immediate trumpet fanfare. In the world of 19th century business, Skepticism was as common as hay in the fields. But Henry, displaying a determination matched only by a salmon swimming upstream, persevered. Understanding the magnitude of his creation, he embarked on one of history's most fascinatingly mundane marketing campaigns, evangelizing the scrapings of his saucepan with passion rivaling any bard of old. He canvassed towns with posters, survived disdainful glances from gentlemen's clubs, and seized every opportunity to prove that indeed his formula was the future. In time, Henri's diligence paid off. His product found fame among frazzled parents and reluctant infants, expanding beyond the dreamy Alpine confines of Switzerland to the far reaches of Europe. Babies, whose previous culinary experiences had been sadly limited, could now partake in a more sophisticated dining affair, thanks to the miracle of farine lactée. Nestlé as a company began to flourish under Henri's watchful eye, its origins deeply rooted in the comforting traditions of baby bottles warmed by hearth fires, tended meticulously like fragile domes of patience. Think of that first Nestlé factory set against the serene backdrop of a Swiss village, complete with the sound of cows mooing approvingly in the background. And there, dear listener, our chapter so serenely finds its rest, comfortably wandering off on the gentle steam of early success, with just a whisper of adventure peeking beyond the horizon. As you drift ever so softly to the land of Nod, let the curtain fall on our delightful founder, knowing the next chapter awaits with teacups of intrigue and spoonfuls of yesteryear's secrets. The history of Nestlé may yet cradle new challenges and curiosities, but sleep now and let tomorrow's tales unfold at their own serene pace. In the serene twilight of history, our tale unfolds in the quaint alpine town of Witty, Switzerland. Picture it, if you will, a place where the cows are debatably happier than the people, grazing amidst the lush greenery, producing milk so rich and sweet it could make even the most lactose-intolerant soul give pause. It was here that a determined pharmacist by the name of Henri Nestlé brewed up a concoction that would change the world, or at least the part of the world that enjoyed a good cup of hot cocoa and regretted it on the scale the next morning. Henri Nestlé wasn't just any milk aficionado. No, he was a visionary. And like all good visionaries, he had a rather peculiar obsession: baby formula. Ah, yes, the age-old quest for the perfect baby milk substitute, which all began with an endeavor to solve infant malnutrition. 1867 should deserve a mention, that fine year when Mr. Nestlé, dearest Henri, concocted the first iteration of his magical farine lactée, a delightful mingling of cow's milk, wheat flour, and sugar. The savvy folks of Vevey hailed it as nothing short of a miracle, and who wouldn't, given that a certain Swiss child made it out of an unfortunate gastronomic episode alive, no less. But much like a good comedy, Nestlé's story took an unexpected twist. With the company expanding faster than a soufflé in a hot oven, Henri sold his prized creation, a move that, despite its preposterous sound, rivals any top-plot twist you could find in the beefiest of history texts. It seems the cunning Mr. Nestlé foresaw the complexities of international corporate maneuvering as less intriguing than his current interest in birdwatching or something equally Swiss. What followed was a comedic dance through the decades as the Nestlé brand grew larger, gobbling up competitors and expanding into new and strange lands. Nestlé's new owners weren't just satisfied with feeding babies, you see. Oh no. Ambition took the wheel, steered by a driver who perhaps missed the guidance because they were busy reading the roadmap upside down. They set out to dominate the world's supply of chocolate, coffee, and even bottled water. Yes, the drink of the gods. Or rather, a free-for-all, until these chaps came along. A text mysteriously titled, "If it's wet, we can own it," may or may not exist, but the sentiment surely does. Imagine the globe's waters meeting like sardines in a can, labeled for Nestlé's growing empire. Silly as it sounds, that was the goal. Now, dear listener, as the Nestlé behemoth sprawled, like a clumsy yet determined toddler in a slightly too large suit, it dabbled even in the beverage industry. Ah, what an amusing jaunt that was. From instant coffee revolutionary tactics in World War II to the takeover of sparkling water brands, rumor has it, This journey was inspired after a particularly effervescent dinner party. The quest for a liquid monopoly became a feature of the company's expanding horizons. And let us not forget the politicking, the high stakes of sugar tariffs and cocoa beans, where boardroom battles often equated to grandiloquent chess games, but with more expensive suits and fewer actual rules. The company's history became interspersed with colorful tales of lobbying bravado that were less Mr. Smith goes to Washington and more Charlie Chaplin gets lost in Congress. As we pause here on the gentle edge of this charming narrative, sipping metaphorically on a tall glass of history mixed with fact-checked humor, the hour grows late. The romance of industry with an ever-present question of ethics lingers in the air, like the cocoa dust in a Swiss chocolate factory. What tousled deeds and mergers yet to be unfolded still wait in the wings? Does this slumberous journey offer more peculiar turns and unresolved quandaries? Oh, but that is a tale for another night. For now, as eyelids grow heavier and thoughts meander like a Swiss river, drift softly into dreams of alpine meadows where time dances to the merry jingle of cowbells under the watchful gaze of Henri Nestlé's shadow. In a cozy corner of the world where sleepy whispers intermingle with the gentle rustling of pages, we find ourselves turning another leaf in the curious tale of Nestlé, a company with a past as rich and creamy as its chocolate milk. As you sink deeper into your plush haven, let's wander together through a tale of branding brilliance and occasionally bizarre detours, where truth is sometimes stranger than the dreams that drift. Through your slumber, Nestlé's foray into the world of canned milk might seem as ordinary as your second cousin twice removed, but it was a pivotal moment, almost like discovering that one sock you lost 6 months ago. The tour guide of this particular journey was none other than Henri Nestlé himself, a German migrant who waved goodbye to his homeland and said hello to the Swiss Alps, armed with an inquisitive mind and a penchant for blending curious concoctions. Now, you might wonder what spurred Henri's fascination with milk. After all, milk seems as commonplace as Tuesday morning coffee. But for Henry, the challenge was as invigorating as a cold swim at dawn. It was the mid-19th century, and suffice to say, dairy preservation was less than ideal. Back then, keeping milk fresh was akin to attempting to keep cheese slices in a paper envelope. But Henry, with his scientific foresight, saw opportunity in encasing milk in sturdy tin cans, a rather novel invention back then, much like the hula hoop or the absence of Wi-Fi in cafes. As if guided by some celestial cow spirit, Henri devised a method to create shelf-stable condensed milk, arguably one of the greatest lactose achievements of the day. This milky miracle could last longer than a politician's promise and was a balm to mothers longing for a nutritional safety net. Not only did it help nurse the calves of unwell cattle, but it also soared to popularity among British soldiers in the Crimean War who were sorely in need of something to soften the blow of hardtack biscuits, which were essentially the fiberglass insulation of their time. Having tasted this initial success, Nestlé began to expand, much like a balloon delighted by too much helium. The more Henri tinkered away in his lab, the more Nestlé prospered. With his milk shenanigans now famously hailed or possibly mooed, he sold the company and retired to enjoy the tranquility of, well, not dealing with the complexities of milk physics. Little did Henri know that his little Swiss enterprise would one day grow into a preeminent chocolate behemoth, seducing taste buds the world over. A peculiar irony, given that Henri Nestlé himself never made a chocolate bar, an oversight peculiar enough to make even the sleepiest historian raise an eyebrow in bemusement. Yet, before clinking glasses with chocolate giants or contemplating the global marketing omnipresence of Kit Kat, the brand hummed along on a crescendo of dairy-driven melody. Of course, there's a certain irony in the French word Nestlé, meaning cradled or nestled, as the company would soon come to nestle itself into controversies as well as cuddly commercials. But that, dear listener, is a tale best spread out like warm butter on tomorrow's piece of toast. For now, let the gentle hum of history's lullabies serenade you as the stars twinkle their approval of late-night milk revelations. As we prepare to venture through the next chapter, let Henri's spirit and his steely tins of condensed wonderments flit gently through your dreams, inspiring a night of serene contemplation and perhaps an extra frothy decaf cappuccino come morning. But for now, snug and secure in your narrative cocoon, let your imagination drift softly as a feather on the tide of sleep. In the steadfast march of time, even the most delectable empire has its softer, slightly murky foundations. By the time the late 19th century rolled around, Nestlé was weaving its Swiss chocolate dreams into the fabric of European palates. But amidst the sweet symphony of milk and cocoa, Henri Nestlé was about to pivot his company with an unexpected product, one that would cause reverberations in history and perhaps your tummy. Let us find ourselves in the year 1875, in the charming town of Vevey, Switzerland. Picture a young entrepreneurial Henri Nestlé, who, having already created a powdered infant formula due to his childless but inventive disposition, now turned his attention to something decidedly more adult. Yes, it was condensed milk. This thick, syrupy creation was poised to waltz across the culinary landscape. But what makes it worthy of our historical pillow talk? Well, dear listener, because it led to one of the sweetest collaborations of the century. Enter Daniel Peter, a fellow Swiss innovator whose greatest pursuit was turning chocolate, hitherto a brittle delicacy, into a creamy, melt-in-your-mouth experience. He needed milk, but not just any milk, the kind that wouldn't spoil in the casual manner of the day. Nestlé's condensed milk was the key that would effectively unravel the enigma of milk chocolate. Together, they orchestrated a delightful coup against the dark stronghold of cocoa, ushering in an age where milk chocolate would seduce taste buds worldwide. Now, as you rest your head on your pillow, imagine the dreamy glow of a fireplace illuminating a modest Swiss kitchen. Daniel and Henry chuckled softly over the cauldrons of sweetened, condensed inventiveness, unaware that their culinary caper would set the stage for such iconic indulgences as Swiss Miss. But the story, like any respectable late-night snack, doesn't stop there. The success of milk chocolate catalyzed a frenzy of innovation at Nestlé headquarters. Knowing a good thing when he tasted it, Henri saw milk as a unifying element for other ambitious culinary pursuits. It is peculiar how a simple dairy delight could evoke such powerful commercial alchemy. Markets were conquered, new products were crafted, and a distinctly Swiss twist of marketing savoir-faire wrapped it all in a bow. But let us not neglect the antics and quirks of the day. The Swiss folk were known for their emphasis on precision and quality, yet even they couldn't predict how a footnote in their quaint dairy operations could spiral into an international phenomenon. One can almost hear the whimsical echoes of cowbells tingling through alpine valleys, vibrating with the possibility of new confections and expanding waistlines. As you sip on this saga of serendipitous dairy delights, remember the simple symphony of Swiss cows placidly grazing, their milk destined for creations that would captivate the globe. The nascent Nestlé company was harvesting more than milk. They were gathering the catalyst for delectable dreams and, hopefully, less dramatic stomach grumbles. Consider for a moment the imaginations of our eccentric forebears fervently applying their churning prowess to the cauldrons of commerce. Nestlé, now expanding its ambit, continued to tinker with dairy and chocolate, with childlike wonder and preposterous creativity, qualities that would eventually lay the foundation for one of the world's largest food conglomerates. As we draw a gentle close to this chapter of Nestlé's spirited journey, remember that behind every great culinary coup, there are both brilliant strokes of innovation and eccentric dashes of serendipity. Whether it's condensed milk or a partner born from a neighboring town, beauty and sweetness often emerge from unexpected and sometimes odd pairings. So, as the night envelopes you in its soft embrace, you might just dream of cows with ambitions larger than their pastures, or chocolatiers with pioneering spirits. Drift gently into the moonlit adventures of sleepy entrepreneurs who mixed milk with miracles and found themselves at the doorstep of captivating culinary creation. As we say goodnight to this chapter, let's prepare to unwrap another layer of history where business acumen and creamy confections continue to play their perennial roles. Our journey sails us calmly down the winding river of time, where in the year 1912, a peculiar breeze rustled through the corridors of the Nestlé headquarters. Imagine a scene less like a bustling hive of corporate activity and more like an artist's retreat, if artists swapped brushes for business strategies and coffee breaks for frantic meetings over future pillow stuffing strategies. Yes, my dear listener, Nestlé had its hands in just about everything, except perhaps interpretive dance. But frankly, we aren't entirely sure. The early 20th century was quite the whirlwind for Nestlé, navigating a world teetering between change and tradition, much like a cat tiptoeing on a fence, dividing chaos from tranquility. On this particular note, our tale swoops through the Swiss firm's unexpected dance steps into territories wholly unrelated to their creamy white beverages. You see, around this time, Nestlé was not just delighted with concocting the finest powdered milk for babies and various chocolatey wonders. They wanted more. More what, you might ask? More chocolate-covered utopia? No, though that would have been delightful. Instead, Nestlé found themselves wrapped up in producing, wait for it, vegetable fats. Now, this wasn't just some grand attempt to genetically crossbreed lilies with cocoa beans. No, my drowsy-minded friend. Vegetable fats were all the rage. Precarious as it was, they thought it would diversify income streams like a Swiss river, multifaceted and a little cooler than everyone else. But why stop at vegetable fats when there's a world of industrial chemicals and flavoring agents to explore? Neither of which sound particularly dreamy, do they? But it was essential, the sort of essential you feel when your cat insists on having a midnight snack just as you start to drift off. The post-World War I era carved a distinct void in the sweetness of chocolate and the nutrition of milk, necessitating Nestlé to pivot their focus on sustenance and sustenance's slightly eccentric cousin, margarine. Nonetheless, innovations kept churning. While society indulged in jazz, flapper dresses, and those incredible talking pictures, Nestlé was deep in the lab concocting something called Milo, a rather wholesome malted magic. And so it was that those who couldn't sing got their vocal pipes boosted with slightly mediocre energy, so they could at least hum and do a little jig when no one was looking. The 1920s brought Nestlé into territories uncharted, but not unmapped, thanks to someone's cousin's friend who left their travel diary in the office. The company dipped its spoons into culinary adventures, debuting products that traversed lands far beyond Swiss borders. Diversification was not merely a word, it was Nestlé's mantra, whispered ominously yet kindly, as if to suggest, go forth boldly. Just remember to wipe your feet on the way. History classes often overlook these moments, preoccupied perhaps with events like the Roaring Twenties economic fiesta, where the stock market embodied a caffeinated squirrel on a pogo stick, a wild ride destined for a curious collapse. But here, we're interested in the gentle whispers of Nestlé's plans and aspirations, mapping the ever-spiraling pathways of culinary creativity. As the last echoes of the 1920s drifted on the breeze, Nestlé found itself at another crossroad. Did they pause for a leisurely assessment? Perhaps while sipping tea, perched upon a mountain of chocolate cartons. One can only speculate that procrastination, much like wrists deep in a candy jar, offered comfort and warmth in times of irreversible decision-making. Now, dear listener, as your eyelids grow heavier from this evening yarn spun on a softly ticking loom, we float serenely on this babbling brook of Nestlé's history. The tale drifts naturally, like a feather in the mist, gently guiding us into a new chapter where the world's future beckons mysteriously on the horizon. Sweet dreams await as the story continues to unfurl its gentle, whimsical secrets. As you snuggle deeper into your bed, let me whisk you back to the year 1977, a year when disco fever was sweeping the planet and Nestlé was about to face a decidedly less funky situation. You see, this was the year a dramatic boycott painted the company in a rather unflattering shade of corporate boo-hiss. Yes, dear listener, nestled amongst all the polyester and bell-bottoms was a tale of social activism that would make even the most stoic historian chuckle into their elbow patches. Picture it, a world grappling with pet rocks and Star Wars hysteria when a group of fervent health activists decided to shine a spotlight on Nestlé's rather unsettling baby formula marketing practices. If activism had a soundtrack, the 70s would have been set to the tune of "Staying Alive" by the Bee Gees, because let's face it, staying alive was precisely the point of their passionate outcry. These activists had discovered that Nestlé was promoting their baby formula in developing countries with all the gusto of a game show host armed with a brand new car. The catch? The formula required clean water, which wasn't readily available in many regions. And without clean water, this benevolent substitute nutrition turned into something less than nurturing. Tragically, this oversight led to increased infant mortality, a fact that couldn't simply be swept under the company's proverbial rug, certainly not one as vibrant and plush as a 70s shag carpet. The subsequent boycott was the stuff of social justice legend, with churches, charities, and concerned citizens banding together like a magnificent patchwork quilt of morality. Picture granola enthusiasts in their finest hemp attire, marching with placards adorned with both babies and very unamused storks, all while likely humming to themselves about world peace. As the protest gained steam, Nestlé found themselves in a PR pickle rather stickier than any of their chocolate bars. It was as if the universe had spliced the pages of a corporate strategy handbook with a Dr. Seuss book. Rhymes and riddles abound, none more perplexing than how to quell public dissent while perched atop their cocoa bean empire. And so, for 2 decades, the boycott bobbed lazily upon the waters of public discourse, occasionally making a splash here and there as revelations of formula marketing antics emerged. Imagine, if you will, every boardroom meeting being as uncomfortable as sandals at a nudist beach, misfit objects in an otherwise quaint setting. But the true bedtime story twist here, my sleepy listener, is that this whole fracas compelled improvements in ethical standards, sparking conversations that resonate even today. Thanks to those dedicated souls of the 70s, armed with an abundance of idealism and countless polyester ponchos, awareness about corporate responsibility began its bumpy journey into our collective consciousness, ensuring that mothers, babies, and indeed companies never forgot the lessons learned on those demonstrative streets. As you drift into a tranquil state, pondering the curious dance between public outcry and corporate conscience, allow yourself to slip further into a restful reverie. Ahead, the pages beckon with another tale, where history, like the smoothest of stones, skips upon the tranquil waters of night, guiding us gently onward into the next chapter of this deep slumber journey. In the softly lit archives of history, where tales blend with whispers and laughter, echoes like a comfortable old song, we arrive at a peculiar point in the Nestlé saga, a moment both charmingly ridiculous and unfathomably real. Picture, if you will, Gabriella the chocolate canary, standing as both a symbol of whimsy and corporate audacity. In the mid-1980s, Nestlé, already a titan of the global market, decided it was time to dabble in the cutting-edge world of public relations. What better way to capture the public's heart than by employing a feathered mascot? Thus, Gabriella, a bright canary trained to peck out tweets long before Twitter was even a glimmer in the digital eye, was hatched upon the world. Gabriella, resplendent in her golden fluff, was tasked with unveiling new chocolate recipes. Legend has it, her chirps marked marketing, meetings where sales strategies were cloaked in feathery brilliance. The mere presence of Gabriella at corporate events seemed to lighten the rather heavy air of chocolate capitalism with a flit and a flutter. Those were meetings filled with the hope that a bright yellow cheer could overshadow controversies as bitter as a 99% cocoa bar. As odd and charming as it sounds, Gabriella's stint as Nestlé's ambassador of sweetness was short-lived, a testament perhaps to the fickle nature of marketing fads. Or maybe birds just aren't cut out for corporate espionage. However, her legacy lives on in the collective memory of Nestlé historians, proving once again that even multi-billion-dollar conglomerates yearn for a touch of whimsy. While Gabriella's story flutters into obscurity, we glide onwards through the annals of Nestlé's history, discovering next the era of environmentally friendly packaging, a tale that's both richly textured and delightfully unnerving in its twists and turns. Let us drift gently, like a leaf falling from the cocoa trees, as we transition to explore the surprisingly verdant corner of Nestlé's past. In the sleepy little village of Nestlé Land, which might sound like a theme park but isn't, things were beginning to take a rather unexpected turn. The scene was set with rolling Swiss hills, sheep grazing leisurely, and the faint echo of chocolate whispers floating in the air. Yes, it was as serene as a picture postcard, until one delved into the swirling depths of historical nuance that Nestlé managed to craft over the decades. We find ourselves observing the curious case of the Great Nestlé Pricing Assemblage of 1950, an event that reads like an economic thriller but unfolds with the amusement of a well-timed sitcom episode. It's here, amidst the backdrop of a world emerging from the shadows of war, that Nestlé determined it was time to rearrange the chess pieces on the board of global prices. Yet, the moves made were not always plain vanilla. In those days, Nestlé's strategic juggernaut was quite the spectacle. Picture this: a cadre of bespectacled number crunchers, each with slide rulers and adding machines, laboring in tobacco-stained boardrooms adorned with maps of the globe. This was an era when whispers of global pricing strategies were as exciting as a Swiss yodel echoing across the Alps. Rhythmic, strange, yet delightfully surprising. As they recalibrated their cost bearings and margin expectations, market trends became their bread and butter, quite literally. The complex tango between supply and demand led them to introduce a flurry of price changes on essential goods, which bewildered consumers who were now required to pay extra for the privilege of instant coffee's revolutionary time-saving magic. And then, of course, there was the milk. Sweet, gentle milk. The dew of life itself, or at least that's how it was represented in the dazzling advertising campaigns of post-war Europe. But as Nestlé deftly realigned its dairy pricing with the precision of a clockmaker adjusting a delicate timepiece, the milk began to tell an interesting tale of its own. The price surge that occurred was ingeniously framed as an investment in nutritional futures, a tagline that, while neither here nor there, certainly made the cost of a glass of milk feel like a down payment on immortality. The crowning moment of this pricing odyssey was the introduction of what the executives affectionately termed Operation Survival Kit, a combination of products designed to give the everyday consumer the impression of being well prepared for any scenario, blending practicality with the comfort of tins and packets adorned with the bright smile of the Nestlé child. Nothing says, "the worst is behind us," quite like powdered cocoa labeled with optimism after all. Hopping continents, we find the strategies being rolled out in vignettes of various geographies, adapted and dramatized to suit local flavors and temperaments. The company's strategic zest was akin to a traveling circus, complete with its own dazzling array of exaggerated performances, a ringmaster overseeing the most intricate balancing act between profit and ethical notion, while the trapeze artists of commerce twisted and turned in remarkable fiscal corkscrews. But beneath all the waltzing figures and swirling spreadsheets lay the real tale. Was this a masterstroke of genius or just a well-orchestrated tangle of well-meaning blunders? Whichever way you lean, there's little denying the hypnotic charm of it all as financial jigs and pricing pirouettes dance themselves into a comfortable perch atop the hill of history. And now, as our gentle sojourn through this particular chapter draws to a close, imagine drifting further into this world of dreams. A world where pricing strategies and powdered milk mingle amid echoes of ancient coffee grinders humming their timeless tune. Over the horizon, the unfolding adventures await, offering yet more insights wrapped in whimsy and ease, like finding a golden ticket in your morning cereal. As sleep embraces you like a warm Swiss blanket, know that the dance of numbers and markets shall continue, gently guiding you to the next tale, snoozing around the corner with a smile and a chuckle, as the moon cast a silvery glow upon the sleepy Swiss town of Vevey. A gentle breeze rustled through the picturesque streets, whispering tales of history past. It was in this quaint setting, snugly nestled against the shores of Lake Geneva, that our protagonist, no, not a valiant knight or a star-crossed lover, but rather a humble milk processor, first set his industrious mind upon the purpose that would eventually crinkle brows and unfurl eyebrows worldwide. The stage was set, dear listener, for the saga of Nestlé to unfold, complete with its own peculiar blend of intrigue, ambition, and just a dash of bovine enthusiasm. For you see, Henri, Nestlé, a German pharmacist turned Swiss entrepreneur, was determined to solve one of the pressing concerns of mid-19th century motherhood, the feeding of fragile infants. Yet, as is often the case in history, his intentions, warm and milky as they were, would curdle into unexpected complexities. One can imagine Henri poring over his concoctions, surrounded by an aromatic array of herbs and canisters, the scent of which might have made the air in his workshop resemble that of a spa shared by prevailing Swiss cows. Henri, whose name even invoked a delectable mental image, was on a quest to soften the rigors of infant nutrition at a time when parenting didn't involve video monitors or parenting blogs. Mothers and babies of yore were sometimes in dire need of quality nutrition, a need Henri hoped to address with his farine lactée, a flour-based substitute using cow's milk, wheat, and sugar that promised digestibility and convenience. As you drift along this velvety river of narrative, picturing the pastoral scenes dotted with contentedly chewing cows, you might be tempted to wonder, what could possibly go awry in this simple tale of infant nourishment? But therein lies the curious enchantment of history, for Nestlé's nutritious aspirations soon intermixed with the complexities of global commerce and corporate maneuvering, an act that might be likened to blending artisanal chocolate with a modern art installation where delightful textures unexpectedly clash. With demand escalating like a sleepy toddler suddenly spotting a dinosaur, Nestlé was poised for expansion beyond the picturesque confines of Vevey. But this growth wasn't without its bumps, especially as the company's ventures stretched across borders, transcending continents, and introducing its product to distant lands. Commercial success, as it happens, can occasionally exhibit the tranquility of a stampeding herd. Imagine, if you will, distant markets where Nestlé's products arrived like exotic visitors, garnished with the allure of Western promise. Cultural idiosyncrasies and culinary traditions clashed with modern marketing prowess, leading to misunderstandings that could have made any feather-brained diplomat's ears ring like a symphony of teaspoons. Nestlé's entanglement in the realms of infant formula didn't merely stop at how it crossed oceans. It plunged headlong into stormier waters when certain marketing practices, like zealous missionaries of modernity, traversed into territories where nuanced understanding was as thin as shaved chocolate. One's mind might turn to Africa and Asia, where informative claims and aggressive strategies threatened to dim the gentle hearth of breastfeeding traditions, sparking controversy akin to a particularly opinionated debate over the best way to prepare fondue. But fear not, dear listener, for this bedtime tale, even as it ventures through labyrinths of ethical quandaries and corporate conniption, intends no such fretful descent into despair. Instead, let us gently park our scholarly bicycles, the kind with clever baskets full of artisanal cheeses, by life's riverside. As the night deepens and the world beyond your window hushes into a tranquil lull, we shall soon embark upon another chapter, one where the journey unfurls further, where unfolding truths glide cozy as a boat on a moonlit lake, still inviting you deeper into the heart of our tale, so you may drift ever closer to the dreamscape of sleep. In the dimly lit lanes of history, where cobwebs gather like whispered secrets, we find ourselves once again meandering through the curious and dusty tomes of Nestlé's storied past. Tonight, dear listener, we turn a gentle eye toward the often overlooked affair of Nestlé's entanglement with a rather unexpected celebrity. Coco, the moody diva of the bean world. The 1970s and 1980s were times of disco balls and daring moustaches, but in the chocolate industry, these were the years of a particularly sticky situation. You see, as Nestlé's appetite for cocoa grew into something quite insatiable, the quest to keep up with this sweet, dark delight led the company into all sorts of established amorphical gymnastics, attempts to wrangle the unpredictable whims of the cocoa bean. Why, you might ask, was cocoa so notoriously wild? Well, it turns out cocoa had a rather demanding personality, craving just the right balance of tropical bliss and tender care, lest it throw a tantrum in the form of poor yield or worse, an acquisition by the pesky pests of the jungle. In a serene yet slightly surreal corner of the world, the Ivory Coast became the unlikely stage for this tale. Ambling through cocoa plantations that stretched out like verdant laundered sheets, farmers were akin to highly trained lion tamers, coaxing these finicky fruits into producing beans of deep perfection. Nestlé, in its quest for this divine essence, initiated partnerships and practices that often seem to balance precariously on the brink of ethical misadventures. The company's gambit was simple. More cocoa meant more chocolate, more happiness, and indeed, more profit. However, there was a less savory aroma wafting through these prosperous plantations, a whisper of exploitation and unfair labor practices. It is here, in the intertwining vines of cacao fields, that we find workers as young as 13, clad in tattered overalls. Now, one might argue that the children of the time probably didn't know they were part of a global chocolate enterprise. They might have thought they were participants in a secret worldwide game, something akin to Willy Wonka's less ethical, less whimsical chocolate factory. Perhaps the golden ticket here was retirement, though that path was unfortunately paved with struggle. Amidst this bitter cocoa mix, Nestlé's PR department worked overtime, crafting images of pastoral charm and morally fulfilled promises. Yet behind this gauzy curtain lay questions wrapped in mystery, like a gift nobody particularly asked for. Why were these working conditions allowed to persist? Alas, varnishing reality with glossy brochures can only work for so long before the inevitable splinter pokes through. But let us drift away from the earnest chimes of documentary reality for just a few sleepy, scintillating seconds. Picture, if you will, a young cocoa bean embarking on its own journey, a rebellious teenager amongst beans, perhaps harboring dreams of being brewed into a frothy mochaccino in a Parisian cafe instead of the humble chocolate bar. Or there's the cocoa bean who's intent on crafting a breakout career, hoping to snag a voiceover gig in Swiss commercials, whispering sweet nothings of rich chocolatey goodness to an adoring public. Yet, as our chapter draws to a peaceful close, let us return gently to those moonlit fields swaying softly in the Ivory Coast. Picture the whispering winds, rustling the cocoa leaves, with their own nocturnal pitch. Nestlé's history here is a puzzle wrapped in milky layers of both triumph and neglect, where economic pressures outweigh sweet ethics. The intertwined tales of farmers and company executives remain a tale for another day, or perhaps the crux of tomorrow's bedtime confession. As we tuck the chapter away, folding its corners neatly, our journey will pause here. But worry not, for when we next meet under the penumbra of chocolate history, we shall open a new page, a saga that whispers of yet more corporate escapades and moral quandaries, one snugly settled in the wings, waiting patiently as the cocoa bean dreams on. In the flickering heart of history's more shadowy corners, we find ourselves wandering into the peculiar era when Nestlé, a company founded on the promise of nutritional virtue and milk-flavored optimism, embarked on a peculiar marketing campaign that history textbooks often gloss over. Close your eyes and let us sail back to the bustling 1970s, a time when tie-dye shirts and bell-bottoms were all the rage, and corporate strategies were, let's just say, occasionally more psychedelic than practical. Now, imagine a marketing meeting at Nestlé headquarters, where executives, likely sipping strong espressos from tiny cups, contemplated how to catapult their instant coffee into a world of wider appreciation. Picture them doodling on their notepads, trying desperately to link their product to a concept that would brew excitement worldwide. And, as legend would have it, one imaginative soul dared to suggest a strategy that revolved around a very curious theme: romance. Yes, romance. The kind you'd find in love songs played incessantly through tinny car radios. Under the shimmering influence of the suave 1970s aesthetics, the idea emerged. What if catching the eye of a potential paramour was as easy as offering them a cup of Nestlé coffee? It made a curious kind of sense, didn't it? A warm cup of coffee could thaw even the frostiest of hearts. Little did they know, this campaign would brew a concoction of chaos that was stronger than any espresso shot. Thus, born was a series of commercials that transformed a simple coffee break into a slow-motion romance novel, complete with longing glances over the rims of coffee cups, set against backdrops that ranged from misty cafes to panoramic beach sunsets. Stereotypically handsome European gentlemen, equipped with mustaches that would make even a walrus envious, would woo equally glamorous women who might have otherwise been starring in spy films. The adverts, drenched in exaggerated existential angst and flirtation, suggested that an exchange of steamy beverage was all it took to spark love's eternal flame. Oh, the sweet hilarity of it all. Sure, it may not have successfully made each viewer fall madly in love with the next person who handed them a cup of coffee, but it did spark a curious global phenomenon, the Nestlé romantic shim moment. And so, in the spirit of the times, instant coffee became not just a drink, but an essential prop in life's grandest little theatre. But beyond this cinematic showcase of sweet caffeinated allure, the campaign did something even more unexpectedly delightful. It led to an amusing series of cultural interpretations around the world. Rumor has it that in some parts, in those delicate moments where words might seem futile, saying, "Shall I make you a cup of Nestlé?" became an offer laden with layers of romantic implication, a question perhaps akin to, "Shall we dance?" Meanwhile, in the company's boardrooms, the executives toasted their success in bringing people not only coffee, but also camaraderie, reveling in visions of a world where every cup brimming with instant powder had the potential to kindle a fairy tale romance, or at least a very heartfelt conversation. As we drift back from this chapter into the soft embrace of our own beds, let's muse on the rich, scene tapestry of pursuits that businesses undertake all in the name of commerce. And occasionally, comedy. And while dreams entwine with history's gentle chuckles, know that within the bizarre blend of marketing mishaps and romanticized espresso, there lies a whimsical reminder. Sometimes the history that puts us to sleep with a smile is the best kind of history. As the laughter subsides into a gentle sigh and you nestle into the blankets of another restful night, imagine the whimsical world of marketing adventures yet to come, awaiting just beyond the horizon in the next narrative thread. In the quiet corners of history, where the tapestry of time is delicately woven with peculiar threads, one often finds delightful oddities that stir a gentle chuckle or two. Such is the case with Nestlé and its frothy expedition into the world of fizzy milk. Yes, dear listener, you heard that correctly. Fizzy milk. This chapter of Nestlé's chronicles unfolds in the 1980s, that boisterous decade known for neon leg warmers, unapologetic mullets, and, apparently, carbonated dairy drinks. Albert, a creative soul with more whimsy than wisdom, found himself pondering one day while sipping a fizzy soda. In that peculiar moment of epiphany, he thought, what if milk could sparkle like a soda and still maintain the maternal comfort of a cow's warm cud? Thus began this tale of creamy effervescence, a tale of the once ill-fated product, milk fizz. With passion more effervescent than his concoction, Albert convinced Nestlé's management that the world was craving carbonated cow juice, a beverage innovation so groundbreaking it would, for reasons only Albert knew, take Nestlé to places no other beverage dared to go. As the tale goes, factory floors were soon bustling with fascinating machinery designed to infuse milk with bubbles, much like a mad scientist's hidden lair. The oppressive scent of dairy mingled with new innovations, echoing the sort of innocent ambition history often forgives or forgets. Market testing involved an array of customers sipping milk fizz, their expressions morphing from curiosity to confusion as quickly as a hiccup. Neither quite pleasant nor definitively unpleasant, The festively foaming milk left its samplers wondering exactly what just popped in their mouths. Of course, practical considerations seemed as distant as the Milky Way. For instance, would toddlers appreciate a beverage that burped back at them? Could the effervescence withstand the faithful journey from store shelf to home fridge without succumbing to the flat existentialism usually reserved for forgotten soda? Alas, the introduction of Milk Fizz felt much like a practical joke that overstayed its welcome at a polite gathering. Consumers, while intrigued by the audacity, perhaps couldn't fathom the coexistence of bubbles and barnyards. This was the kind of delightful mishap that didn't spell immediate disaster, but rather skulked its way into boardroom jokes and marketing fables. Nestlé's marketers tried valiantly to paint the fizzy beverage as the beverage of the future, but it fizzled out quicker than you can say, "Stick to cocoa." And so, our dear Milk Fizz was gently laid to rest in the annals of experimental beverages, a bright star extinguished too soon, perhaps, or justly consigned to obscurity. Our dreamy interlude doesn't end in despair, however. This was a learning episode nestled amid Nestlé's far grander endeavors. The moral of this tale? Well, some ideas bubbled too brightly before our eyes, only to burst into nostalgic fairy tales of whimsy. A reminder that sometimes it's best to let milk rest serenely, untroubled by the turbulence of fizz. The Milk Fizz chapter quietly slipped into history as a humorous anomaly before we drift elegantly into the next narrative, where Nestlé's story continues to swirl in unexpected directions. As bubbles disperse, imagine us following a gentle stream leading to new curiosities yet unexplored. In the quiet town of Brock, Switzerland, the year was 1929, a year known in history as the grand opening ceremony for the Great Depression. Yet here in Brock, things were looking up for Nestlé, or perhaps looking down upon the rest of the chocolate world from a particularly tall ivory tower. Nestlé, in a stroke of what some might call genius, and others a curious act of confectionery consolidation, was merging with the chocolate company Peter Kyler Cola. Think of it as an event where corporate titans waltzed into a hermetically sealed ballroom, but with more cocoa beans and slightly less dancing. As the boardrooms were alive with calculations more complex than a Swiss watch, down below in the bustling factory, tales of Peter's technique and Kyler's creativity danced across the floors among the ships of chocolate. Workers crafted confections with a precision that would make even the most discerning cogs of the Industrial Revolution envious. The sweet hum of machinery kept time with the heartbeat of innovation, creating a soothing symphony that lulled Brock into the gentle endeavors of chocoholic dreams. But what, you ask, made this merger special enough to be whispered about under lamplight, in chapters long after the factories dimmed and the markets crashed? It was the very stuff of bedtime legends, the origin of the milk chocolate bar. You know, that smooth, blissful bout of endorphin-charged happiness neatly packaged in foil. Daniel Peter, a name deserving a chocolate statue, preferably dark, had conjured milk chocolate by skillfully blending Henri Nestlé's milk powder with cocoa to produce a treat sweeter than a serenade under a Swiss moon. With the merger, these unique chocolate recipes came under Nestlé's expansive wing, and the world soon found itself basking in what we might call a chocolate renaissance. An era where those sugar-coated, coin-shaped chocolates gave way from the clutches of children and into the hearts of adults demanding real chocolate currency. I must whisper into your conscious mind, how was it that in a moment of global monetary woe, Switzerland's chocolate empire emerged not only unscathed, but also thriving? Nestlé deftly navigated the complexities of international trade and tariffs while mixing the creamy allure of its new confections like a maestro at a grand piano, each keystroke determining prices, flavors, and global dessert dictums. As the chocolate flowed like medieval mead down the golden rivers of the Alps, the whispers of cacao beans and the rich aroma wafted into sleep-stricken minds, bringing about an anecdote whispered with a smile, a legend of Nestlé's secret vault where recipes, like spells, were guarded by a dragon of a watchman. Or perhaps it was merely a particularly stern Swiss banker with a penchant for sugar-laden snacks. Who's to say? It was under these cocoa-charged circumstances that Nestlé weathered the storm of the Depression, convincing the weary and the worn out that perhaps happiness could indeed be found in a nibble-sized piece of confectionery heaven. In those enveloping moments of sweetness, the world could pause, breathe, and maybe, just maybe, believe that things would be all right. So here we rest, infused with the mild musings of milk chocolate dreams. And as another layer of sleep descends upon you, imagine how the tides of time can turn with a single clever merger as the center of its whirlpool. But fret not, for the tales continue to swirl in the wrappers of history, the finest wrappers stitched together with the silkiest cocoa. And what comes next, well, it'll be as rich with intrigue as a bar of the finest Swiss chocolate, but with only half the calories. Nestled in the comforting embrace of a hazy twilight, we drift into the curious world of sweet treats and curious entanglements that spun the Nestlé narrative into captivating chaos. Picture an elderly Swiss village nestled among the alpine foothills, where chimneys puffed contentedly like grumpy old men mumbling about the weather. This is where our gentle protagonist, Henri Nestlé, began his delectable, albeit troubled journey into the annals of history. Now, rewind to the mid-19th century, when everything glowing with the potential of industrialization seemed like a good idea. Brewing instant coffee, bottling lightning bugs, and, in the case of Monsieur Nestlé, curing infant malnutrition. Nestlé's modest ambition led him to create a groundbreaking formula designed to nurture babies and alleviate parental anxieties, an invention that for some placed him just a smidge beneath Gutenberg. If you're picturing a halo hovering above Henri's head, well, history tends to do that. Although historians might chuckle into their chamomile tea, suggesting it was more of a trial-and-error approach involving dairy farms and a lot of hand-churned confusion. However, those early days weren't as sweetly straightforward. As a bedtime story, even if newspapers of the era did hail his concoction as the elixir of life. The elixir of life, granted, came with its own asterisk. Not all infant digestive systems appreciated being guinea pigs in this bubbling brew of powdered promise. Henry, presumably adjusting his bowler hat and sighing into the Alps, which echoed his sentiments back to him, did not foresee the controversy bubbling beneath the surface. As nighttime drapes its blanket over the moonlit mountains, we meander through the caramel-scented chaos of the 20th century, where Nestlé's confectionery expansion intertwined with the bitter roots of historical discontent. In the decades to come, Nestlé would be firmly planted within savory declarations and questionable culinary ethics, from cocoa farms to spring waters as fiercely contested as dragon hordes. But tonight, dear dreamers, we tiptoe through a different tale. Did you know that Nestlé once flirted with the notion of cornflakes and breakfast cereals nestled in milk? In an ambitious attempt to invade every meal, Nestlé's venture into the crunchy morning world resulted in a sauté of snafus. The cereals were as willful as a flock of particularly opinionated geese. If they weren't getting soggy too quickly, they were being cheerfully devoured by eager rodents in the storage warehouses, which left breakfast lovers with more protein than they bargained for. With gentle humor and a twinkle in his eye, Monsieur Nestlé might have chuckled, saying, "C'est la vie," as his ventures reflected the broader historical tapestry of a company that mirrored the fluctuations of societal appetite and ethics. Yet the melancholic notes accompanying impatient factory hands, who desperately wished that breakfast foods would agree to meet them halfway, didn't go unheeded. Weaving through such quaint tales and tangles gives us a glimpse not only of the confectionery conundrums, but also the perpetually evolving landscape of taste and tradition that was as layered as the finest millefeuille. Each delightful disaster and entrepreneurial misstep colored the pages of Nestlé's past with the gentle absurdity that history so often gifts us, a reminder that beneath the corporate facade lay a comedy of errors as deliciously flaky as puff pastry. As dreams whisk us toward the crescent-peaked horizon, we ponder what other morsels of the past await our sleepy exploration. The story evolves, gently beckoning us further into its rich tapestry, as delicate and intricate as the lacework of snowflakes on a crisp, silent night. as we gently unravel another colourful thread in the dark and woolly tapestry of Nestlé's historical quilt. Let us step into the whispering corridors of time, where business ambitions clashed with social expectations like an orchestra missing its conductor. Here in Chapter 18, we find ourselves spiraling through the labyrinthine tale of chocolate, a sweet treat with a history that's anything but candy-coated. Picture a time not too far after the swinging 1960s, when bell-bottoms were wide and ethics rather narrower. Our protagonist, Nestlé, had by now firmly stamped its presence on the global stage, like a peacock in the world's corporate menagerie. The confectionery crown was heavy with responsibility, albeit occasionally muddied by shortfallings that the company wore like unfortunate fashion choices. In the early hours of this chapter, we peek into the cocoa plantations, nestled in the hazy hue of tropical nostalgia, where the cacao pods dangled temptingly from stout, fragrant trees like nature's gilded Christmas baubles. However, these are not the ethereal gifts from a festive dreamscape, but rather the seeds of both sweetness and scandal. The affair between Nestlé and its cocoa supply chain hasn't always been a rosy romance. Rather like an upside-down soap opera, it involved a few too many misunderstandings and betrayals. Reports of using cocoa sourced from questionable labor practices occasionally surfaced, casting shadows long as a whisper through a library at midnight. The mere thought of chocolate becoming the cause of a frown was, of course, anything but delectable. But fear not, dear listener. This is not merely a tale of woe, for it wouldn't be a Nestlé story without a hint of reformative redemption. Efforts to trace and better the sincerity of their cocoa practices grew in tandem with the public's sharpening awareness, as if chastened by an invisible schoolteacher peering over their glasses. And though cocoa beans may not exactly have become fairy tale beans a la Jack, the murmurings of change began to rustle through the company's ranks, slowly turning heady ambition towards sprouts of sustainability. It's a gentle comfort to think that for every ounce of sin, there's the potential for many ounces of virtue, one cacao pod at a time. In such dreamy reflections, one might even imagine old time, cartoon birds fluttering scribbled notes of compliance and responsibility from Nestlé HQ across vast seas, where islands of palm trees sway in the breezes of change. It's a balm as soothing as the notion of a warm mug of their hallmark hot cocoa on a snowy evening, served just before bedtime. Nestlé's partnership with its chocolate vices, like an ancient, worn-out tome of love letters, reminds us that history is a thing of continuous chapters, not singular destinations. As they sip from the chalice of roasted cocoa, engagement with sustainable practices becomes less of an abstract ambition and more of a vital quest, a quest to make yesterday's criticisms today's wisdom. With this chapter closing, let's fluff our imaginary pillows and tuck ourselves back into an uninterrupted flutter of lullabies and lessons. We leave Nestlé gazing toward infinite horizons, twinkling with the stars of improvement, small morsels of solace to sweeten the shadows of its historical journey. Now, as the world outside softly whispers to quiet, dimming dreams, let's nudge open the door to the next segment, where more tales surely await us like forgotten treasures hidden beneath the sands of an ancient beach at dusk. Once upon a time, in the sleepy, chocolate-scented alleys of Switzerland, there was an ambitious company helmed by one Henri Nestlé, a man with a penchant for turning milk dreams into palpable realities. On this particularly quiet evening, a spectral mist drifted lazily across the alpine fields, carrying whispers of bygone days when Nestlé's factories hummed to the industrious rhythm of milk and cocoa. Beneath the shadow of the Swiss mountains, the tale of Nestlé's adventure into the world of chocolate unfurled like a rich tapestry. Henry, a German-born pharmacist, stood at the threshold of greatness, all because of a little concoction that combined milk, cereal, and sugar, a gooey delight that would one day become baby formula. But dear listener, the road to success is often paved with the crunchy bits of cereal that nobody wanted to clean up. One could picture Henry in his study, gesturing wildly with a spoon at a pot of bubbling sweetness as the swirl of cocoa and milk created a cacophony of smells capable of waking even the laziest of Swiss cows from their alpine slumber. Yet therein lay the unsweetened truth. Beneath those frothy waves of chocolate history lay darker currents. 1974. A year clad in polyester bell-bottoms and a melodic disco beat. It was also a year when the World Health Organization declared that maybe, just maybe, promoting infant formula over breast milk in underdeveloped countries was not such a grand idea. Nestlé, by then, had its name inked across the globe, selling not just chocolate, but an idea, the promise of convenience encapsulated in a tin. The controversy, dubbed with dramatic flair as the Nestlé boycott, was the kind of global kerfuffle Hallmark wouldn't touch, with a 10-foot, lovingly crafted greeting card. Critics argued that Nestlé's aggressive marketing led mothers in poorer regions to use formula instead of breastfeeding, lacking access to clean water, nutrition, and sometimes even the understanding that the tiny scoops needed a level of precision worthy of a Swiss watchmaker. The result was a downfall into malnutrition and infant mortality, a dark cloud that hung over the cocoa empire's brightly lit chocolate palette. Yet, just as in all good stories, resolutions sought to be penciled into the picture. Nestlé, faced with international outcry and a movement that would turn them into the corporate equivalent of an infamous villain in a Bond movie, began earnest reforms. They danced a diplomatic jig at various tables of the World Health Assembly and adopted guidelines that sang somewhat sweeter tunes, though the notes sometimes came off-key, leaving an aftertaste hard to wash down. Even as we float down this river of time, sinking deeper into the plush cushions of our gentle curiosity, it's worth reflecting on these bewildering human passions. Perhaps, in the quiet night, you might connect the dots of history with the hazy dreamscapes of an upside-down chocolate fountain. Who would have known that the humble cocoa bean could spur stories headier than the richest, darkest Swiss hot chocolate? The night stretches languidly across the sky now, with stars twinkling like far-off campfires, beckoning us toward the next shadowy chapter of Nestlé's past. As the coverlet of history pulls over your eyes, let the soft echoes of this tale cradle you toward the gentle shores of slumber, promising more stories that tie reality's mischievous threads into the comforting quilt of dreams. And so, dear listener, with the gentlest whispers of history kissing your ears, let us rest our voices and drift together, for there are more adventures to come in the billowing ruffle of pages yet unread. Under the sleepy glow of our proverbial campfire, we tiptoe into the unique escapade of Nestlé during the curious era of condensed milk and Morse codes. Now, fair listener, picture this. It's the mid-19th century, and our dear friend Henri Nestlé is about to make a sweet splash in the world. But before we dive into the syrupy depths of chocolate dreams, let's unravel a less chocolatier aspect of the tale. Imagine, if you will, that you're nestled in a cozy Swiss kitchen, pots clinking melodiously, ready to hear a secret whispered from history's lips. Henri Nestlé, a man whose innovation stretched from the laboratory to the larder, was pioneering the commercial production of powdered milk. This was no whimsical endeavor. It was a response to the pressing need for infant nutrition. With infant mortality rates looming large over Europe like cumbersome clouds threatening a picnic, Nestlé concocted a baby formula that promised nourishment and convenience. Some say the formula held the hopes and dreams of new mothers within its metal canister, a belief almost as sizable as the canisters themselves. Those were simpler times when convenience came packaged in a charming tin. As if Henri wasn't busy enough playing a nutritional savior, another peculiar opportunity came knocking, wrapped in military parchment. You see, during the Franco-Prussian War, the soldiers, much like tourists on a diet of battlefield excitement, found themselves in need of nutritious, long-lasting sustenance. Enter Nestlé's powdered milk, rugged enough to withstand the rigors of army knapsacks and versatile enough to fortify weary soldiers with strength on the go, like a Starbucks for the sword-bearing. In the quiet nights, beneath the starry vats of Swiss gastronomy, Nestlé's innovations were transforming from eclectic ideas into everyday sustenance, much like a slow-cooked stew easing its way to perfection. But not all sweet success stories wear sugar-coated endings. While the powdered milk captured the military's fancy, the darker side lurked in the factory shadows. The burgeoning demand for Nestlé products required expansion, faster than the speed at which Swiss mountain winds could echo the call for change. Factories sprouted, sprawling like cast members at a Shakespeare play, eager at first, yet apprehensive of the impending stage direction. Industrial revolution. Here, under the soft scrutiny of the Swiss moonlight, workers labored in conditions as challenging as pronouncing "chocolatey giddy up" on a first try. It's almost comforting, in that lulling way that only a bedtime story can achieve, to consider how the workers, much like us, were privy to life's dual nature: growth and struggle, milk and chocolate, hopes and hard labor. And as we nest deeper into the fabric of this historical yarn, we see how the weaving of Nestlé's will became the canvas for industrious vigor. Now, the rest of this confectionery narrative involves sweeter exploits and perhaps a dollop of chocolate mischief. But as we brush the cobwebs of fatigue from our eyes and steady ourselves for the next chapter, imagine the tantalizing aroma of history beckoning you further along this delectable timeline. For in the scrolls of time, it's as if history herself whispers a prelude to our next tale, a tale wrapped snugly, waiting to be unfurled like a golden wrapper, shimmering just beyond our bedtime horizon. In a world where multinational corporations are considered omnipresent juggernauts, imagine Nestlé as a somewhat bumbling, well-intended chef who occasionally spills the soup everywhere. Our tale continues as we shift focus to a peculiar chapter in the annals of Nestlé's long culinary journey, the conquest of chocolate, and the mishaps that might have left the Swiss Samaritans blushing a rosy cocoa hue. Picture a sepia-tinted kitchen where earnest mustachioed gentlemen in starched shirts are hard at work under the command of the ambitious Henri Nestlé. The aroma of chocolate wafts through the factory's bustling corridors as workers busily stir massive cauldrons of liquid joy. But alas, not all was sweet in the chocolatier's haven, for they faced a conundrum of epic proportions, humorously so, not unlike trying to reconcile the inexplicably incendiary temper of a newfound volcano. You see, in the early 20th century, the world discovered chocolate's irresistible allure, but Nestlé saw a golden ticket, or rather, a cocoa-colored one, to further tap into this burgeoning global craving. Embarking on a chocolate odyssey, they dreamed of mastery over the finest cacao from the mystical realms of West Africa, unaware of the slippery slopes and cocoa-coated faux pas awaiting them. As the Swiss conquerors sailed towards the vibrant coasts of Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, little did they know that navigating the labyrinthine supply chains of cocoa required more than just Swiss precision. It demanded a delicate dance with local economies and flavors, and occasionally mischief. Nestlé found themselves entangled in a chocolate-coated riddle involving tangled yarns of fair practices, ethical sourcing, and a sprinkling of rather unfunny labor disputes. The story goes that in their quest for fine cocoa beans, Nestlé unearthed a network of challenges akin to unwrapping the notoriously stubborn foil of a chocolate bar. There were whispers in the cacao plantations, murmurs of labor that needed a touch more evaluation, a hint of oversight, hardly the stuff of a silky milk chocolate ad. And yet, as deftly as an optimistic pastry chef frosting a lumpy cake, Nestlé attempted to address these concerns, albeit with some slip-ups that would make even the most patient chocolatier wince. As we float through this dreamy reverie of chocolatey escapades, let's not forget the moments of levity. For instance, there was that time Nestlé launched a massive campaign to reassure the public about its commitment to ethical sourcing. One marketing maestro even suggested crafting ads featuring anthropomorphized cocoa beans, comedy sketches that might soothe international woes with playful dialogue and wide-eyed beans rationing out plots like New York's finest theater company. It involved an amusing mix-up, and suffice it to say, the bean thespians never quite made it past the drawing board. Throughout these exuberant attempts to weave a spirited tale of confection, Nestlé realized they were on a proverbial sugar high, one necessitating a recalibration of values more sincere than a bite of unsweetened dark chocolate. And with that, they began to steer their tinier, wafer-thin vessels towards transparency, buoyed by a newfound buoyancy infused with genuine efforts to sweeten their legacy, one slow, careful bite at a time. In this whimsical tapestry of cacao mishaps and market dynamics, the narrative begins to gently melt across the parchment, blending the company's hilarious oversights with a resolve found in the last square of a cherished chocolate bar stashed secretly for midnight treats. The tale leaves a dollop of wisdom and wit on the tip of your tongue before drifting off to sweeter dreams, whispering promises of continuing this cozy fable, where history meets hilarity. The past blends with pleasures, and old battles become bedtime lullabies in hues of gentle twilight. Now nestled comfortably in your imagination, the story glides onward while you remain lulled into delectable dreams, gently preparing for the next chapter to unfold, a delicious mystery, just a page away. As the evening sun softly slumbered over the horizon, weaving its golden threads into a tapestry of twinkling stars, we find ourselves drifting into a curious tale that waltzes between history's shadowed corridors and a quaint Swiss village, known not just for its picturesque views, but for a dubious legacy tied to a tall glass of murky chocolates and creams. Yes, we're heading back to the world of Nestlé, the empire built on cocoa and controversy. Once upon a time, in the tranquil town of Witty, Switzerland, there lived a resourceful pharmacist named Henri Nestlé. In the 1860s, Henri was a man of grand ideas and even grander moustaches. If you were to meet him, you'd be forgiven for mistaking his meticulously twirled facial hair for the curve of a confident grin. Henri's humble beginnings in concocting baby formula from milk, sugar, and wheat flour were as revolutionary as they were innocent, much like a gurgling infant polishing off its first taste of ice cream, both groundbreaking and slightly disastrous. Nestlé's ingenuity bubbled over into success, attracting attention and investments faster than you could say cocoa crisis. It's as if his moustache alone had built an empire, not just in appearance but in substance. However, the burgeoning corporation wasn't impervious to the turbulences that brewed within the chocolate cauldrons of history, nor did it shy away from controversies darker than a bar of its finest bittersweet cacao. The mid-20th century found Nestlé tiptoeing through the tumultuous waters of international trade with all the grace of a serviceable yet slightly mischievous voyaging vessel. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Set against this backdrop of global cocoa trade emerged stories of questionable marketing practices that would make even a stoic history professor raise an eyebrow. Yes, while the heart of the chocolate business may be sweet, its arteries were occasionally clogged with questionable ethics. Crossing into warmer climes than its snowy alpine roots, Nestlé's dairy delicacies ventured into developing nations with a pitch as smooth as velvet. Our formula is the next best thing to mother herself, they claimed, albeit in the dulcet tones of 1970s advertising. One might liken such promotional zest to that of a fervent street musician serenading an indifferent crowd, inspiring some while leaving others sleeping or perhaps just slightly perplexed. During this era, debates simmered hotter than a fondue could melt. Critics argued that marketing formula milk to mothers, often less able to boil water safely than the folks at corporate headquarters realized, was akin to playing a rousing game of musical chairs, only with no end, and with seats constantly being pulled away. The accusations flowed thick. Nestlé had leveraged its glittering promises to the detriment of public health across continents. The infant formula scandal, as it became known, drew ire from activists and organizations alike. As our tale lingers gently in the hushed pauses between facts and whispers, it's worth remembering how complexities often dance around great enterprises like chocolate ribbons curling in a steaming cup of cocoa. Nestlé has, through the years, marched to the rhythm of market demands and public scrutiny, sometimes resembling an unapologetic patriarch at a family dinner who insists on saving the best slices of pie for himself. Yet, perhaps in these shadowed histories lie lessons as rich and velvety as Nestlé's renowned culinary offerings. The twists and turns of this Swiss juggernaut's journey reveal not just tales of corporate empire building, but also the varied and vested dynamics of human ethics, economics, and enterprise. As you snuggle deeper into the comforting embrace of your pillow, think of Nestlé's bright-eyed early days, ruminating on how progress often propels us through paths untrodden, filled with both sweetness and discretion. Thus, history's enigmatic journey gently morphs into the night's silken tones, softly inviting you to ponder the mysteries yet to come, while lulling you into the solace of sleep. So, dear listeners, let the warmth of these chocolate-laden musings carry you gently into the night, tucking you in with promises of more nocturnal serenades, perhaps touching upon legacies that linger amidst breakfast bowls and coffee cups the world over, until another peaceful night beckons with whispered secrets of distant eras. Nestle warmly beneath your covers and drift into those dreams where history's secrets softly shimmer. In the quiet town of Vevey, snugly nestled against the gentle lap of Lake Geneva, a curious conglomeration of ideas was brewing in the formidable minds of Nestlé's executives. This serene setting was, believe it or not, the birthplace of bewilderingly complex yet comically overlooked historical decisions. As the clock ticked onwards, Nestlé's decisions were soon to unfurl into a narrative blend of economic prowess and ethical flubs so profound they could lull even the most bespectacled historian into a contemplative slumber. Picture the scene. It is the 1970s, and consumerism is spiraling into its golden age. Neon signs illuminate cities like daytime specters, and bell-bottom pants are invading closets across continents. The marketing genius of Nestlé, like a sly fox at the cheese factory, saw a golden opportunity in the shadows of this consumer maze. The powdered milk tale of woe was in full swing. Yes, it may sound as thrilling as watching dairy-free paint dry, but here we find a fount of ironic twists. Nestlé's powdered milk was touted as the panacea to infant nutrition in developing countries, a declaration only rivaled by the hyperbolic bravado of ancient alchemists claiming lead could be gold. Alas, the only gold this promised to spin was of the financial variety, and like all tales too good to be true, this one bore an asterisk finer than the print on a candy contract. Documents told mothers that formula was the key to health. Neglecting to mention the water required was often riskier than a toddler with a pair of scissors. These brochures, an unintentional masterclass in surrealist comedy, claimed unfaltering safety while glossing over their own dependency on clean water, a luxury not all regions had ready on tap. Hermits in mountain shacks might have missed the memo, but the rest of us heard the sighs from boardrooms as publicity storms gathered like apocalyptic rain clouds. While Nestlé executives were busy sheepishly explaining that perhaps mother's milk was not the mortal enemy they once posited, back in Vevey, another peculiar decision was brewing like a pot of wrongly named herbal tea. A decision that, whispered in the corridors of historical ramifications, would carry forth its legacy in varying shades of bemusement and bewilderment. The tale of baby formula would set a precedent in how global corporations dance the delicate tango between shareholder profits and, dare we say it, societal contributions. Nestlé found itself not just in the business of chocolate and tinned milk, but rather unwitting narrators of an age-old cautionary tale about unchecked corporate enthusiasm, an enthusiasm that sometimes forgets it has raced several chapters ahead of the corporate social responsibility playbook. Our story tonight, however, is not one merely of admonishment, but of gentle smiles at human folly, a reminder that it's sometimes the stories quietly chuckled at in the boardrooms of history that best help us rest our minds and close our eyes. As the stars over Vevey twinkle, each perhaps a quiet nod to the follies and triumphs below, one can close their eyes imagining what new concoctions Nestlé might brew as this world of ours pulses onward. Will they finally crack the code on home-delivered chocolate that doesn't melt in the sun? Perhaps. But that, dear listeners, is a dream for another night. Let your thoughts drift down the gentle paths of possibility, softly sinking into the welcoming embrace of your pillow. as our journey through this shadowed history gently leads us towards its final chapter. Tucked away in the folds of Switzerland's lush landscapes, where the cows are so content they might as well teach classes on how to chew cud with Zen-like precision, lies the unsuspecting tale of a man who had no idea that his penchant for tinkering with powdered milk would lead to a giant of a global giant. Yes, in the quietest of fashions, we're looking at the deeply layered quilt that is the legacy of Nestlé, or should we say, Henri Nestlé. In the calm dusk of 1860s, innovation, a time when eureka moments came with top hats and cravats, Henri Nestlé, a pharmacist with a flair for concoction, crafted a life-saving elixir that many would soon recognize as the prototype of infant formula. With its delicate dance between milk, wheat flour, and sugar, it slid smoothly into the hearts and bottles of babies who needed nourishment more than a gentle lullaby. But as with any good bedtime tale, this plot thickens quicker than your granny's Christmas pudding. You see, just as Henri's creation began to put its metaphorical foot in the bustling door of nutrition innovation, he found himself orchestrating a bittersweet farewell. Supposedly wrapped in a curtain of humility, Henri hung his apron, sold his blossoming brand, and wandered into a sunset we can only imagine was accompanied by a sigh of relief, or possibly indigestion from one too many spoonfuls of his own milky mix. And so, Nestlé as an entity began to twirl its way through time. But as it waltzed, it occasionally stepped on a toe or two. A hint of discord entered the ballroom floor when the brand found itself embroiled in something best described as a marketing misstep, especially concerning its infant formula offerings in developing countries in the 1970s. A cautionary tale of how even angels might trip on their own halo, Nestlé's history became peppered with debates and protests, sprouting in circles where ethical quandaries love a good chinwag. Now, if Nestlé's journey was a symphony, imagine it conducted by a maestro who occasionally misreads a few notes but recovers with a flourish so captivating, the audience forgives him. As the melody rolls on through the decades, it includes everything, from the velvety voice of a chocolate factory to cries over, well, let's just say, commerce sometimes gallops far ahead of conscience. In the garden of food and beverage, Nestlé grew an impressive fig tree, vast and rich with diverse fruit. From coffee's caffeine-kissed aroma lifting sleepy eyelids at dawn, to unexpected decaf naps developing somewhere in the sun-dappled branches, this powerhouse burgeoned. Befitting their name, they're everywhere, nearly identical to that one leaf in your hair you've given up trying to locate. Yet, even mighty empires have their teasers of intrigue, offering whiffs of jest. Consider the Chocolate Wars, a series of commercial skirmishes woven into Nestlé's lore. One might envision clumsy candy bar skirmishes, perhaps involving chocolates dashing in the melodramatic slow motion through rain-drenched streets, making ceasefires over coffee breaks, a rhythm more absurdly poetic than one anticipates. Reflecting on Nestlé's odyssey brings a plush comfort akin to sinking into a generous feather bed. It's a tale of science meeting service, with a twist of ethical contemplation and a garnish of public opinion. As the stars sprinkle over Switzerland on one of those postcard-perfect nights, even the still waters of Lake Geneva might hint at such complexities with gentle ripples of mystery and mirth. And now, as our narrative quietly reaches its own nighttime pause, it lies down gently like a well-read chapter in a favorite book. May this nocturnal tapestry of powdered dreams and pressing questions knit into your subconscious like a warm and familiar quilt. Let it keep you company until the coziness of sleep takes its proper place, bidding you to the land of dreams where even the most bustling tales curl into comfort. So, dear listener, with a soft goodnight and a nodding knowledge that history can indeed be as snug as a bedtime story, we send you into your night's refuge with whispers and winks until your morning finds you once more. Sweet dreams.